Gearheads know that some projects need so many parts, it feels like you need a whole storage unit just to store them. That's what eBay Motors' 122 million parts are for. Think of it as your virtual parts garage. They've always got the right fitment at the right prices. Use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.
Hey everyone, this is the Almost World Podcast. Bringing to you mind-blowing interviews with guests from all over the world. So settle down, relax, and enjoy the show. Oh yeah, by the way, if you like the podcast, please support Elmo's World Podcast on Patreon. Your support is what helps the podcast improve more and more. Welcome to Elmo's World Podcast. This is Elmo, your host, and I am with my awesome friend Kashif. Hey man, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Kashif. I'm from Pakistan and I'm currently a student of Islamic Jurisprudence, and I'm Muslim, and I think that's my introduction.
So, Kashif, what can you tell me a background of why you're a Muslim and how you came about to be a Muslim?
Well, basically, I was just another layman Muslim till my teenagers. But later on, I found about many communities on Facebook and other social media, and I got introduced to many people and Muslims all over the world. And I learned quite a lot of things, especially more diverse things about how legality and jurisprudence is dealt all around the world.
So what about the legality? Are you like studying it right now?
I'm talking about the legality, how laws are formed and why they are formed, and how to analyze the laws that are already formed.
So I hear you're studying Islamic jurisprudence, right? Oh, okay. So why that specific study?
Well, basically, my father chose it for me, and I wanted to study Arabic. Arabic is the compulsory part of this study, and I also wanted to study how our ancestors have regulated the law between different colors and creeds of people. You know that Islam spreads from Africa to Asia as a majority religion. So I think I wanted to know how it came to be such sort of influence on.
Okay, so can you talk about the different kinds of jurisprudence that Islam has? I hear that there's like four schools of Fikh.
Yes, those jurisprudence. I don't think jurisprudence has types, but Islam has four schools of thought in legality, or you can say in jurisprudence, but those are not kinds of jurisprudence. There are four schools of thoughts, or four ways to interpret the sources of Quranic or Islamic texts. There are Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanafi, and Hanabila. Four basic school of thoughts, and there are more derivations as you move along the path.
Okay, so jurisprudence is basically interpretation of law, right? It's different from theology and Aqidah.
Yes, jurisprudence basically means to study what law is and what law ought to be.
So let's talk about why there are differences in how people, I guess, how Muslims interpret the law, right? One is the Shafi'i, right? What makes it different from all the others? Can you talk about each one, starting from Shafi'i?
Well, the differences occur from every legal principle. That, for example, in case of eating, halal and haram, some jurists or some Islamic legal scholars say that you can eat a sea snake, and others say it cannot be eaten because it represents a real snake, which is in actuality poisonous. But you know that some eels are edible; they are not poisonous. So there's a bit of confusion there. So some say you can eat it, some say you can't. So that's some interpretation difference there, and other interpretation differences occur in all other parts of life, which are basically, minute differences or ignorable differences.
Well, I wouldn't say ignorable, right? That's why there are differences, though, right? And I would say that I guess I want to ask you, right? Like, what makes Shafi'i, what makes it essentially Shafi'i and not other schools of thought? What features does it, stand out from the other schools of thought?
Basically, that's where it gets complicated. It does not stand out completely like black and white. At some point, Shafi'i mixes into Hanabila, and some point Hanabila mixes into Hanafi, and some point Hanafi mixes into Maliki. They diffuse into each other at one point, and at one point they stand apart, stand alone. So at some point you will see them agree on one point. They'll all agree. At some point they'll say that no, I interpret it like this, I interpret it like this, and some way there are differences. There's no distinction that we can say that this is Hanafi school of law, this is Shafi'i school of law.
Mm-hmm. So where do they differ?
Well, in Maliki school of law, they used to study the actions and living lifestyles of Ahlul Madina, the people of Medina. And in Hanafi school of thought, they rely more on things like qiyas, and because these are basically formed on 4 Islamic scholars. And Shafi'i school of thought is formed by Imam Shafi'i, and because Imam Shafi'i traveled a lot, so he interpreted verses accordingly, so that many or diverse people can benefit from it.
And so I guess that there is actually like a specific, like imam behind every school of thought, right? Like, for example, Maliki follows the teachings of Imam Malik, right? And Shafi'i for and others too.
Like I said before, that it's not definitely black and white. It's a spectrum which diffuses into each other at various points, and at various points it stands alone. Have you ever studied law that there are various articles in law?
Yeah, I understand that. I understand that. But like, I want to know where they sort of differ from the others. For example, okay, they could go on the main highway, and go follow the mainstream. But where do they have the differences?
Well, basically, they were 4 imams. They interpreted according to what they believed or what they saw through the verses or through the scripture. Imam Hanifa was raised in Persia. He saw that the people of Persia and the people of Arab likewise, and his thoughts as a Persian affected his jurisprudence. And Imam Malik stayed all his life in Medina, so his thoughts of the people of Medina affected his theology and affected his legislation. Imam Shafi'i was a traveler, and I don't know much about Imam Hanbal, which is quite popular nowadays. It's with respect to Muhammad Hijab. So I don't think that you can pick a particular law and say that this is Hanafi or Shafi'i or Maliki, because at some points they have same rules to drive law, at some points they have different. For example, like I gave you an example before, that Imam Malik used to say that any narration that contradicts the actions of the people of Medina will not be accepted, while Imam Hanifa relied more on his logical reasoning while driving a hukum. And these differences occurred where narrations were weak, you know, because hadiths were compiled 200 years later after the Prophet's death. So there were some narrations which were weak, which were transmitted by a few people or transmitted by one chain of narration. So when such narrations came, the scholars had some disputes or disagreements between them. And to say that they disagreed on this like that because they belong to such school, I don't think that would be justification to them.
So okay, so I did sort of understand what you said about Imam Hanifa. That he's usually just using the logical reasoning behind a certain hadith, right? And it's explained like, oh, you can't do this because there's wisdom behind it, and that we can only try to understand the wisdom. So that's why this particular law is in place, right? But then you what you see in Imam Malik, who is like focused on Medina, right? And what is his thought process? Is he more focused on tradition, just following the law as it is, and simply saying wisdom or no wisdom, we're gonna have to follow it to a T? Is that what you're saying?
No. You are right about Imam Hanifa, but Imam Malik didn't ignore wisdom completely. He said that if the law in Islam is derived from from narrations, ahadith and Quran, and there are some ahadith which are weak in narration. So he studied a hadith and he saw the people around him and saw that do Muslims do this action, and if he saw that that action was not performed by Muslims, he considered that narration weak and rejected it. He did use wisdom, and he did, for example, there is no direct narration in whether you can marry your grandmother or not. The Prophet did not clearly say that. The Quran did not clearly say that you cannot marry your grandmother. So they derived from the logical reasoning that you cannot marry your mother, so you cannot marry your mother's mother or father's mother. That in that place the logical reasoning or qiyas was used. They did use wisdom, but their wisdom was limited in different scopes. Like Imam Malik said that these Muslims don't do this, so it cannot be a strong narration. And Imam Hanifa said that this does not sound okay to me, this does not form in line with human logical reasoning, and he then decided upon it.
Mm-hmm. So, Bandy, I guess I would guess that because the Shafi'i school of law is more, he is the imam that led it is, he traveled a lot and he mingled with a lot of cultures, I guess, for different cultures, right? So it allowed him to be more understanding of the law and make it, I guess, like, I wouldn't say flexible, but at least I guess more into like really applying the true wisdom with it, if you know what I mean.
Imam Shafi was a traveler. He traveled a lot of countries, so he understood the needs of the people, and he then deduced his logical reasoning depending on different people, because Islam was supposed to spread all around the world. So he deduced his legality according to the needs of people, so that people might not, find the legality contradicting to their own nature. For example, people of a place have a tradition which is logically sane. I cannot go there and tell them that God said this is wrong. For example, you eat something. For example, the staple food in your country is rice or wheat. I cannot come from another country and tell you that God said no, it is wrong. because that will cause problems.
So what about the Hanbali tradition? Like, who was the, I guess, led it?
It was led by Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, and I haven't studied much about him.
But where do these his, I guess, like, laws follow, or like what makes his thought process sort of different from the others?
There is no distinct point from others, but he follows close to Imam Hanifa, and at some particular laws he differs from all three school of thoughts. Which example I cannot recall. I can't recall any particular example right now.
So what I'm noticing though is that it's purely subjective, I guess, the school of law, these school of laws to how what the opinion of these imams is or are, because, like, for example, if it's not really depending on on a single method, right, that they put in place and you could apply to every law, right, and there is not really like a systematic way. It's just their own subjective opinion and on a case-to-case basis, because it seems to me that you can't even narrate what specific methodology they use in order to understand the laws and understand which to follow, which wisdom to follow.
Well, they gave methodologies. For example, I gave you methodology of Imam Malik. He considered the actions of people of Medina, and Imam Hanifa considered logical reasoning.
Yeah, but it's not any systematic methodology.
Yes,
sure,
it
he
was
considers it, but
inevitably it relied upon the shoulders of people how to deduce law from a weak narration. It was, in the end, the weak narrations were dependent upon subjective reasoning.
okay, cool. So in this case, then, right? If you can't really call it a school of thought if it's all purely subjective, right? But you just, I guess you could call yourself, like, I'm part of a school of Shafi'i if most of your understanding, interpretation of law sort of coincides or is the same with Imam Shafi'i, right? Or maybe you could actually directly got your school, all your interpretation of law from him specifically, so that's why you can say they're part of this school.
I don't think that as a person I would associate myself with any school of thought, because they themselves, the scholars, said that my interpretation can be wrong. And if you find it contradicting to the scripture, you may reject my school of thought or my teachings. So I don't think that there's a need to
What do you
weigh
mean
on
by
the shoulders of
contradicting
the
to
scholars.
scripture? Right. What do you mean by contradicting to scripture? Don't
For
they
example,
have a view that there is just one view of the scripture?
for example, because the scholars themselves were people, they were human beings like us. So they said this, that just in case that some of their interpretation was rejected, because in the end they use their own reasoning, and human reasoning can be fallacious. It can have fallacies. So the scripture is the Quran, and they said that in case something we said, for example, Abu Hanifa said something that someone later on found out that there is some rare hadith or some other hadith that contradicts the narration of Imam Hanifa. So that person may call the narration or the law declared by Imam Hanifa as null and void. And many laws have been declared like that.
Yeah, so it may. So what's the point of, like, listening to these schools of thought if they're just purely subjective, and if you find it for yourself to be contradicting to what the scripture says, then you can totally ignore all four and follow your own understanding of the Quran, right? If that's what what it seems to you.
Well, I am a jurisprudence. I am a student of jurisprudence. I have studied legal positivism and natural law. And many people gave their own opinions. I have forgotten their name right now. There was someone, I don't remember their names, but we studied the history of how people derived law for the sake of knowing how did it, and so that we can use their knowledge or their wisdom to apply in the current era. We don't study a person who made law in 10th century or 11th century so that we may follow him. We study him so that we can know how he deduced law.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I understand that. As if you're a student of law, you look into past former cases that would with the same sort of problem, right, and the issues, and you look at how they solved it, right? But if in this case though, like, there is not really any objective way to actually look at any or how to interpret law, if even the teachers themselves admit that it is purely subjective, so that would mean that how we interpret the law, let's say it's the Islamic jurisprudence in today, could be dependent on how we would approach it too, right? Different from how they would approach it.
So basically, it is not that simple. There are some points of Islamic jurisprudence which for 100 years have been same, which have not contradicted in any of the scholars. It had been applied and used same. Only in the weak narrations, for example, in Arab, there was no buffalo. Buffaloes. There was no buffalo there, so the hukm or the legality or the edible nature of buffalo was not declared clearly. So at that time, the scholars have to use their own reasoning to drive a legal value or the edible nature of buffaloes. So at such cases, people differ on their opinions. Then a new thing arises. But on things, for example, lying, thievery, murder, accusations, defamation, and such clear-cut wrongs have been defined by law, and almost all the scholars agree on how they should be punished. But on things, for example, do some sort of cyber crime. For example, I do cyberbullying or I steal money from a bank. How will you deal with it? That's dependent upon subjectivity, on the subjective reasoning of the judge itself.
Yeah, so if all of this then is, it depends on how you have to apply it in the modern era as well. Okay, but how could you sort of explain the differences in Sharia law in a lot of Muslim countries, right? I guess their politics has a lot to play in it, but I think also that the way they interpret the scriptures, like, and preferably one school of thought compared to the other, is also in play in why there are differences in Sharia law in a lot of Muslim countries.
Well, the principles are provided by Sharia in everywhere. Everywhere you go, the principle of Sharia law, darar wala darar, do not harm and don't allow harm. And principles like you cannot, a person who kills one innocent person is same as doing murder of all mankind. These principles in Quran and Sunnah stay same everywhere. But how you punish the person, for example, what is the degree of punishment? Some people use jails, some people use whips, public hanging, public whips, public whipping, and other sort of physical labor. These punishments and degree of punishments vary from country to country because every country has different economical conditions and every country has different economical needs, financial needs, social needs. Like I'll give you an example. In a poor country where there is shortage of food, the leader should increase the punishment of food theft so that people will stay at peace instead of going into anarchy and killing each other. So according to the time and place, the punishment and the degree of punishment is managed by the legislatures, by the judges, by the jurists of that country. So that's where the difference arises. So that because those people are head of their states, are head of their politics, head of the people, they decide how to manage their country.
Okay, so well, I'm not going to ask you about like why would a Muslim country still allow public whippings or public hangings, but I guess that's very subjective culturally, but wouldn't you say that when it comes to punishments, it's not really necessary for these things to be that severe, like for
I once read there was some legislature who said that it is the rational need of a person to be punished for his crime. Because if you are sending him to a rehabilitation center, you're treating him like an animal, you're taming him. If a person does a crime, I send him to the rehabilitation center so that he may improve and act accordingly to the dictator or the leader of the state or the law of the state. He acts accordingly to the law of the state. I'm treating him like a dog so that he may mold according to my will.
Okay, so
the
that's
legislature used this reasoning.
that's confusing, man. Like, one could also say, like, hey, you're punishing someone severely, like how you would, punish a dog, and if you're not rehabilitating him, like what you should, like, you humans, you go to school, you teach them, you guide them morally, and you help them, right? That's what rehabilitation is. So I don't think that's a strong argument.
One thing is teaching, another thing is taming.
I don't think
Person who does something
okay.
criminally wrong, person who performs something criminally wrong, it is logical or rational for him to be punished as it is a requirement for his rationality because he did something wrong according to law rationally. If he was insane, if he was childish, but which he wasn't. So that's why we treat his criminal action criminally and punishing. I think I'm trying to make sense something.
Okay, so do you hold that specific view too, that is the way that we don't rehabilitate criminals because they're adults and we just punish them immediately for their actions?
The severity of punishment depends on the judge.
So it's for example, so for example, like if the crime doesn't need like rehabilitation, is just unforgivable, right? Then it's not going to be rehabilitation, but it's just going to be the severe punishment. If it's it's like not forgivable or doesn't by the judge's conscience, the person does not deserve to be given a second chance, right? So that's when you apply severe punishment. But if it's a sin, it's a a crime that can be learned and can be but in a way, the same way, punished with time in prison too, then that's applicable.
Well, in law we use a term known as strict liability crime. A crime in which intention is not seen. For example, defamation. If I go and say Elmo Ador is this and that, and he does this and that, and I tell in front of the public, will you ask me to rehabilitate or other stuff? You will not, because this crime is a strict liability offense. Once I have done it, I cannot regain your fame or I cannot regain your respect once I have destroyed it. So for crimes like this, we have strict liability punishments, which will be given whether or not you change your mind or you rehabilitate. The punishment will be given.
Okay, so but I guess like most of the punishments too are also follow like what it says in the Quran, right?
Yes.
Okay, so in this sense, though, what I'm sensing here, or like what I understand here, is that in a way, as a Muslim state, you have to follow what the Quran says. Like, this is the way for punishing, like, right? For adultery, you have to, well, if it's deserving, like public whipping, right? So, and then what you do is, okay, we're applying this now, but I guess that we have to explain why this is the case. So this is sort of just a defense of that.
Well, basically, the concept of adultery is misconceived in many people. For public whipping, you need 4 witnesses of fornication, of 2 unmarried people doing intercourse, and in front of 4 witnesses. In that case, there is whipping. Otherwise, if there is no witness, there is DNA data, or there is some video, or there is some other stuff, the case will be taken to the court, and the judge will decide according to the principles provided in Quran and Sunnah. And that punishment can vary a lot. It can vary a lot depending on the severity of the crime, the grievances of the party, of both parties. So the judge will decide in those cases, and many things like which you said, adultery, are defined in Quran as well. But it's like variable in the end. Every case is variable.
Okay, I understand that. Yeah, and you're going to after you graduate Islamic jurisprudence, bro. Like, what career are you going to do? Like,
Well, I'll get my lawyer license. I'll go to court.
Oh, okay, so that means that you're going to be like a Muslim lawyer, right? And your knowledge can be applied in
Of my country and the criminal code of my country. So I think I can use that here. Other than Islamic jurisprudence, I am also studying civil law as well.
So Kashif, I want to ask you, one last question, because it's been an awesome conversation, and I really wish that we could have a longer discussion, but my internet is really bad, bro. I'm really sorry for this, and yeah.
Chill.
Yeah, and one last question, I guess, is that as a future Muslim lawyer, like, what would be advised for, let's say, like someone who's not familiar with this sort of culture in Islam, and visits a country and sort of judgmental, or just is new to it and is not familiar with it. Like, what would you advise them, I guess, to be acclimatized culturally?
Well, I think that don't study law. I would suggest that, because it gets complicated after you start studying law. The basic thing we all know is that love each other, be kind to each other, and treat each other equally. And in the end, we are all humans. You would know that after after 9/11, everyone said that no Muslim condemned those bombings. But I know myself Muslim people, who have protected many from the terrorists, many non-Muslims from the extremists. So I'll say that the common Muslims are not that extremist or aggressive. Everyone is just another person like you, following a different set of ideology. I think that's it. And don't study law. It's not simple. It's not easy either.
Okay, then it's been awesome talking to you, bro, and I hope you have a great day.
That is mine.
Okay.
So that's the end of it. Thanks for tuning in, guys. This is your host, Elmo Ador Jr. And thank you for listening in. And please subscribe. Please follow us on Facebook. Please follow this. Please. Thanks.
Gearheads know that some projects need so many parts, it feels like you need a whole storage unit just to store them. That's what eBay Motors' 122 million parts are for. Think of it as your virtual parts garage. They've always got the right fitment at the right prices. Use the eBay Motors app or visit ebaymotors.com. Let's ride.
Holidays are here, and so is fashionable fitness. Gift yourself a Samsung Galaxy Z Flip 3 5G, a phone that folds in half to literally stand on its own. Pair it with the Galaxy Watch 4 for ultimate wellness and wow factor. Check health stats, flex personal records. Over 90 activities can be tracked, like biking, swimming, golfing, and more. Invest in yourself with tech made to crush goals. Holidays open up with Galaxy. Shop it all at Samsung.com. 5G connection and availability may vary. Check with carrier. Products sold separately.